Hi, Joe O'Connell, Sandpiper Pump. Today we're going to show you how to put an air end kit into our S15 non-metallic. Out front here, we've got examples of our Sandpiper genuine parts, wet end kit, air end kit. Sitting on the bench with our S15, we've got an S20 non-metallic. The rebuild you're going to see is accurate in man, method, and machine, but for video purposes, some parts of the work performed have been condensed in time. At any point during this presentation, please pause this video until you've completed any phase of the process. Identifying which kit is required for your repair has become easier on newer pumps with the permanently affixed metal serial number tag that now indicates the wet end and air end kit information for the pump. Kit information can also be found in the service and operating manual. Sandpiper genuine replacement parts, wet end and air end kits provide a bill of material of the components included in the kit. All items included in the kits are components that Sandpiper recommends replacing when rebuilding a pump. The pump we are using today is an example of the ease of kit installation. Always consult your respective service and operating manual before performing any maintenance on your pump. Service and operating manuals include composite repair parts drawings, repair parts list, and torque specifications. For service and operating manuals or more information, visit us on the web at www.sandpiperpump.com. Always remember that safety is the highest priority. When working on or around any equipment, always follow the correct safety procedures. Always read and follow the safety warnings and instructions in the service manual before any work is started on the pump. For more information, see the Warren-Rupp video on safety at sandpiperpump.com. The pump we are using in this presentation has been built new and is considerably easier to work with than a pump that has been used in a process. Additional time may be required in the preparation and separation of parts and components during the rebuild. While the pumps are different in size and flow, the techniques and procedures used in the rebuild of the S15 non-metallic are also applied to the commonality of the S20 non-metallic. These are the recommended tools used with the rebuild. While the sizes may change based on the model, the type will remain the same. Torque wrench, ratchet, small slotted screwdriver, O-ring pick, 12-inch pry bars, snap ring pliers, sockets and or wrenches, 1/2 inch, 9/16 inch, 5/8 inch, 1 5/16 inch 6-point socket, 3/16 inch socket head Allen wrench, 5/16 inch socket head Allen wrench. Alright, our air end kit's going to include sleeve and spool, pilot valve, seals, gaskets, and O-rings. So let's get started. For ease of assembly and disassembly, we're going to use a 3/8 inch electric impact gun. We're going to go ahead and start by taking off this discharge manifold assembly. Once you get the bolts loosened from the manifold assembly, you take the manifold assembly off the pump and set it aside. Take the check valve assembly seals. You want to remove the check valve assemblies. It may be a little stuck. You may need pliers to pull those out. Reach inside the chambers and you want to remove the innermost check valve assembly seals. And then flip the unit over. And you want to remove the suction side manifold assembly. Loosen all the bolts. Once you get all the bolts loosened, you can set the manifold assembly aside. Remove the check valve assembly seals and the check valve assemblies. Remove the check ball from the assembly and discard it. Do this for both sides. Next, you want to reach inside the chamber and remove the innermost check valve assembly seals. Next, we're going to remove the main air valve assembly. Loosen the 4 socket head cap screws Take the assembly, set it aside. You can discard the gasket. And we'll remove the air inlet cap. Take the 4 screws out, remove the air inlet cap, and you can discard the 2 gaskets in the pilot valve that's underneath. You may have to wiggle the pilot valve a little bit to get it to come out. Remove one outer chamber. Loosen all the bolts and set the outer chamber aside. Next, we're going to remove the diaphragm assembly. Remember to use a 6-point socket here. This is a plastic outer plate. You don't want to damage that hex head on the plastic outer plate. Once you loosen the assembly, you may get the diaphragm rod. Take your bumper, set it aside. Now you can remove the opposite outer chamber. Loosen all the bolts and set the chamber aside. Remove the diaphragm assembly. In this case, the rod came out with the assembly. Next, we're going to remove the inner chambers. I'm going to take the 4 socket head cap screws out of the inner chamber. Set the inner chamber aside, and you can discard the gasket underneath. Flip the unit over, make sure you push the actuator plunger out of the way so that you don't bend it. Take the 4 socket head cap screws off the inner chamber, setting the inner chamber aside and discarding the gasket. Now we'll go ahead and pull out the actuator plungers. You want to reach into the pilot valve port, pull the actuator plungers out. We'll go ahead and remove the U-cup seals on both sides. Next, we'll remove the actuator plunger bushing, star ring, and O-ring. Using a small screwdriver or a pair of needle nose pliers, you want to reach in and remove the star ring. Then you want to use something to wedge inside the bushing. Here we're using a pair of needle nose pliers. You can use a wood screw. Don't worry about damaging it. It is a component that is inside the airing kit. Underneath the bushing is an O-ring. You want to make sure you remove that O-ring and discard. Flip the intermediate over and repeat the process, removing the star ring, the bushing, and the O-ring. Now we want to inspect our intermediate. Now inspect the surfaces, make sure there's no scratches, gouges in the machine faces. You can dress these up with emery paper, crocus cloth, or some sandpaper. Now you can open up your airing kit and lay out the components because we're going to start to reassemble the unit. First, we want to take our U-cup seals, apply a light amount of grease to it. There's an open face to the U-cup and a flat face to the U-cup seal. The flat face surface of the U-cup seal goes against the intermediate. Work the U-cup seal, make sure it seats into it. Next, we want to install the actuator plunger O-ring. Put it in the bore. There is a receiver groove for the O-ring in the bottom of the bore. Make sure you get the O-ring seated in that groove. Next, we want to install the bushing. There is no up or down to the bushing. It can go either way. Push the bushing all the way down into the bore so it's flush against the bottom. And then we want to take our star ring retainer. Star ring retainer is concave. You want the open cup face of the star ring pointing up. And you want to push it into the bore. You want to make sure it gets seated against the bushing and that all the fingers on the star ring are below the lip. There is a lip in that bore. You want to push the star ring down until all the fingers are engaged underneath the lip. Flip the intermediate over and you can go ahead and repeat the whole process again. Install your U-cup. Apply a little grease on the U-cup. Make sure the flat face of the U-cup seal is against the intermediate. You want to make sure you work that U-cup seal so it's seated all the way into the receiver. Then your O-ring into the bore for the actuator plunger. Make sure the O-ring is fully engaged into the receiver down at the bottom of the bore. Your bushing, press it all the way down. And then your star ring. Star ring is concave. The open cup face of the concave star ring needs to be pointed upward. Press the star ring in and then make sure that all the fingers on the star ring are fully engaged below the lip in the bore. Now we'll take our main air valve assembly and we'll rebuild that. First you want to remove the snap ring. You want to be careful. You need to retain the snap ring. Take both snap rings off the main air valve assembly. There's one at each end. Next we want to remove the end cap. Take a pair of needle nose if you need to. Pull the end cap out. Remove the old O-ring. Set the end cap aside. I'm going to reach in there and then remove the bumper. And pull the opposite end cap off, O-ring and bumper. Set all these components aside. Use them during the reassembly. Next you can slide the spool out. You can discard this spool. Utilizing the new sleeve from your airing kit, stand it up on one end. Slide the body over the top of the sleeve. This will assist in pressing the old sleeve out of the body. You want to retain the old sleeve and remove the first two O-rings. We use this as an installation tool to install the new sleeve. Take our new sleeve now. You want to go ahead and put your O-rings on. Make sure each O-ring fits in the appropriate O-ring groove. Once you get all the O-rings on, you want to apply a light amount of grease to each O-ring. Then we want to inspect our main air valve assembly. Inspect the bore, inspect the faces, make sure there's no scratches, gouges. If you find any, you can dress that bore up with emery paper, crocus cloth, or fine sandpaper. Apply a light amount of grease inside the bore. Grease is applied to keep the items from catching, binding, or cutting while assembling components. You want to slowly press the sleeve in while twisting, and this keeps the O-rings from binding. Utilizing the old sleeve and spool with the removed two O-rings to help center the sleeve and spool into the main air valve assembly. You don't have to get exactly center. It'll self-align once you get the bumpers and snap rings in. Next, we'll install our bumper. Bumper has two faces. There's an X cut in one face of the bumper. That X cut needs to go against the sleeve. Take your end cap, install a new O-ring on there, and apply a light amount of grease on it. Press that into the bore. Next, you want to take a snap ring. There's two faces to the snap ring. There's a flat side and a concave side. Flat side of the snap ring needs to go up. Install the snap ring. Make sure you get the snap ring down into the snap ring receiver groove. If the spool's not centered, just turn the body over, tap it lightly down. You should be able to engage the snap ring then. Using your old sleeve, you can then take and press the new sleeve into the bore so it fully engages up against the bumper. Now take your new spool. You install it into the sleeve. Do not force the spool into the sleeve. You need to twist it or jiggle it until it easily drops in. Take your bumper and install it. Remember, there's two faces to the bumper. There's a raised face and an X cut. Take the X cut face of the bumper and make sure it's up against the sleeve and spool. Next, install your new O-ring on your end cap and apply a light amount of grease on it. Push the end cap in. Take your snap ring. Remembering there's two faces on the snap ring, a flat face and a concave face. The flat face goes upward. Once you get the snap ring down in there, you want to make sure it's fully engaged into the receiver groove. You set the main air valve assembly aside now. Install the inner chamber to the intermediate. Take your gasket, line it up with the intermediate. Make sure that you line up the pilot hole and the air porting hole to the intermediate. I'm going to do the same thing with the inner chamber. First, you want to inspect the inner chamber. Again, making sure there's no cuts, scratches, grooves. You want to inspect the diaphragm bead that's in the inner chamber. Make sure it's clean. Then you want to line up the porting in the inner chamber face with the porting on the intermediate and the gasket. Using your 4 socket head cap screws, go ahead and thread those in. You can leave them loose at this time. Repeat the same process. Put your gasket on, ensuring you have the proper alignment to the intermediate. Inspect your inner chamber. Cleaning it up if necessary. You may have to replace it if necessary. Line up the inner chamber with the pilot valve porting and the air porting on the intermediate and gasket. Thread in your 4 hex head cap screws. Once you get them threaded in, you want to torque those in a crossing pattern to the specifications called out in the service and operating manual. You want to repeat that for both sides. Next, you want to install your actuator plungers. Take a little grease and apply it to the actuator plunger. You can access the port for the actuator plungers through the pilot valve port in the intermediate. You want to reach in there, slide the pin in. You want to do this for both actuator plungers. Make sure you put a little grease on there. Going in through the pilot valve port, you can install the actuator plunger. I'm going to reach in there and push the actuator plunger out of the way. We'll install our pilot valve next. Pilot valve comes pre-lubed. You want to pop out the spool and make sure there's lubrication on the O-rings there. If not, apply a small amount of grease to each O-ring. Put your gasket on to the pilot valve. Make sure your actuator plungers are pushed out of the way. You don't want to install the pilot valve on top of them. They will bend as you tighten the whole assembly back up. Now you can put on your air inlet cap gasket and the air inlet cap. The air inlet cap is marked with the word inlet. It needs to go in the same direction as the name tag. The name tag is up on the pump. Air inlet cap needs to face that direction. Thread in your 4 cap screws. Then you need to torque those in a crossing pattern to the manufacturer's specifications called out in the service and operating manual. Apply a little grease to the rod. You also want to apply a little grease to the U-cup seal and the intermediate bore. You can slide the assembly with the diaphragm rod into the bore now. You want to make sure that you get the diaphragm seated into the groove in the inner chamber. Now we can reinstall one of our outer chambers. You want to inspect the outer chamber. Inspect the machine faces and radius of the chamber for damage or material buildup. Scarring, scratches, or material buildup can be cleaned up by using emery paper, crocus cloth, or fine sandpaper. Replace the chamber if necessary. On this pump there is no suction or discharge side to the outer chamber. You want to ensure though that you align the outer chamber with the nameplate. Go ahead and install your nuts and bolts. Once you have those installed, you want to tighten the bolts down in a crossing pattern to the torque specifications that are called out in the service and operating manual. Flip the unit over, install the bumper. Now we can install our second diaphragm assembly. With the diaphragm inverted on the assembly, you can go ahead and thread it to the diaphragm rod. Then we want to take a couple of pry bars and you want to pry the assembly across. Make sure you get underneath the inner plate and not underneath the diaphragm. You can damage the diaphragm. You can invert the diaphragm back into the groove. You have to make sure you get the diaphragm seated in the groove. And you can install the second outer chamber. Remember to inspect the outer chamber. Remember there is no suction or discharge side of the outer chamber. Just have to ensure that you have the porting aligned with the nameplate. Install your nuts and bolts. You want to tighten those down in a crossing pattern and torque to the specifications called out in the service and operating manual. Next, we're going to install our check valve assemblies. We want to start with the suction side. Nameplate is always on the discharge side of the pump. Take our check valve assemblies, remove one of the ends of the check valve assembly, and install your check ball. You want to do this for all 4 assemblies. Seal has a flat face and a V-wedge face. The flat face in this position has to go down. The V-wedge goes up. You want to make sure you get both of those in. Take 2 of our check valve assemblies, and install them on the suction side. There are two sides to the assembly, a retainer side and a seat side. For installation with the unit on the suction side, you need to make sure that the retainer face of the assembly goes in first. Install both check valve assemblies. Take our seals. Again, the seal has a V-wedge and a flat face. The V-wedge goes against the check valve assembly. Flat face goes up here. Go ahead and put the manifold assembly onto the pump. Orientation of the manifold is based on process requirements and may be reinstalled in either direction. Put your bolts in. And you can tighten all the bolts in a crossing pattern across all 8 bolts and torque them to the specifications called out in the service and operating manual. There will be a gap between the outer chamber flange and the elbow flange. This is okay. The unit is sealing against the seals on the check valve assembly. With the unit flipped over, we can now install our check valve assembly seal. Your check valve assemblies. With the pump sitting upright, you want to make sure that you install the check valve assembly with the seat face first. Take our seals. We'll install those next. Set the manifold assembly on top of the pump. Orientation of the manifold is based on process requirements and may be reinstalled in either direction. You want to put your bolts in. You want to tighten them in a crossing pattern and torque them to the manufacturer's specifications called out in the service and operating manual. Plastic pump, you may want to go back and just check and retorque all the components. Now we want to install our main air valve assembly. You must ensure that you line up the pilot valve porting holes in the gasket to the main air valve and the intermediate. Once you get the bolts threaded in, you can go ahead and torque those in a crossing pattern to the manufacturer's specifications called out in the service and operating manual. That completes our airside rebuild of our S15 non-metallic. If you're doing a complete rebuild, you may also want to see our wet side rebuild, or for additional information, you can find us on the web at sandpiperpump.com or contact after sales support at service.warrenrupp@idexcorp.com. Thanks.